We are live.
We're live.
We're live. We are at Julia's Books and Coffee. Fantastic local coffee. I just finished my cortado, so I have a caffeinated beverage streaming through my bloodstream, which means there's going to be fireworks today.
Oh, that's good. It's not even the 4th of July.
It's not even the 4th of July, but there is going to be fireworks today. We are here to talk about the most contentious issue between us in this race, and that's really healthcare. Last week, as you know, we talked about the military. We talked about warfare, the military-industrial complex, and the economics and cultural implications of that. And we clearly had a lot of agreement.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So today is the very difficult problem of medical care, medical services, insurance, the medical industrial complex. So we're going to get right into it because there's a lot to talk about today. If you are watching, we look forward to your comments later on the show after we've discussed some of the central issues. So we're going to start off today, just like we started off last week, which is to talk about our platforms. So we know that our Republican and Democrat candidates have very specific views. We won't go into them except to the extent that Dan McCready has offered a plan, and it's an 8-point or 10-point plan. And I have looked at it superficially. We're also not going to be going into the details of his plan because we're really going to talk about our views today. So would you like to give a brief overview of yours?
Sure.
And let's assume for the moment that we've got an audience and that we are talking to a group of voters, and you've got, 60 seconds, 2 minutes, maybe 3 if you want, to go over your platform, look people in the eye and say, this is what I think, we have to do. And then I'll do mine, and then we'll go into a longer discussion.
Yeah,
Sure.
Absolutely. So my position, what I advocate for, is the same thing that the North Carolina Green Party is fighting for, and that is a universal single-payer healthcare program. This is sometimes referred to as improved and expanded Medicare for all. So this is some chairs over here clapping. This is what we're fighting for. We believe that this is the way to simplify the overall process of receiving healthcare and making sure that everybody has healthcare as a human right. As it stands, the system is too complicated. This simplifies it. And just in general, healthcare is not something that I believe we need to leave to market forces. It's not something that we need to compromise, have bipartisanship on as far as like doing backroom deals and things like that. It's simple. If we have a single payer system, it's going to be better for everybody. How did I do?
Okay, you're fine on time. So that's your basic platform. If you've got a minute to talk to voters, generally speaking, they're going to hear something close to that. So my pitch, starting in 2018, because I've been, as you know, this is a special election, and I've been campaigning since February of 2018, and so there's been a lot of stuff going on since then in this race and nationally. But I don't think my platform has changed much. I've gotten a lot more insight from understanding what the Medicare for all people are all about. But my main approach is that costs are too high, costs are out of control. And one of the best ways of dealing with prices that people get on their medical bills that they don't understand, what I'm calling the fake prices that hide the real prices, and we don't really ultimately know what a lot of these services cost, is price shopping and price competition and price disclosure. And I know that, just as a side point, the Trump administration is making some attempts at price disclosure. So I would say that the broad libertarian, conservative Republican group of voters is going to be very, very much in favor of that kind of approach. So the question is, where are the areas in medical care that are growing out of control? Why do premiums continue to go up? Why do point of sale costs continue to go up? Why do drug prices go up? And so, two of the things that I mentioned very frequently on the campaign trail is competition for doctors. The medical associations are really kind of a cartelized group, and they've managed to freeze out competitors, and that's why they make so much money. They make about twice as much as their European counterparts. So the question is, why isn't there more competition in doctors? And then the other thing would be, of course, the cost of drugs. Now, drugs are a real sore point because of the patent system, and I believe ultimately in abolition of the patent system. So, just as a side point, Dan Bishop has also argued that we need to look at the patent system because it's had some repercussions, some bad repercussions. So credit to Mr. Bishop for making that point. I would also argue that any government-sponsored monopoly that gives an amazing amount of price discrimination to these kinds of providers is gonna backfire in the way that we've seen. Now, we can talk a little bit more about the implications, but when just to wrap my platform point up, I do believe in vigorous price competition to bring the costs down, and that, I think, is the key point for a lot of people. Then there's a whole other separate problem of how do we deal with the uninsured? What are the different ways that we can expand the market? How do we cover everybody? So anyway, that's the basics of my platform. So there's a lot of distance between us on that, right?
There is, yeah.
And it's hard to really even know where to begin. I mean, we don't want to be too philosophical here. We are talking to we're trying to talk to voters. We're trying to say that we've got a better approach to things. And I do know that people are very angry. Year after year, they've seen premiums increase. Can you talk a little bit about your personal experience, just to give a little flavor? I mean, have you been sort of beat up do you feel like you've been beat up by the system of high deductibles and high premiums and getting coverage for your family, or have you had what you think is a pretty good experience?
I think it's been hit or miss for me personally. I have had experiences, one that I can speak to recently. So like a lot of people, my health insurance is tied to my employer. So if I switch jobs or if I lose my job, I lose my health coverage and have to figure out how to make that work. Or, and this is something that people don't always think about, if my employer, at their discretion, decides to change the health plan because it works out better financially for them, that has all sorts of repercussions for all the people who work for the company. And that's something that happened to me. So I had doctors that I was seeing under an old health plan, and my company decided to change health insurance provider. So we went from, it was Blue Cross Blue Shield to someone else. And what ended up happening, and I didn't realize this at the time, so many of the providers that we had grown accustomed to seeing, that we knew, that we trusted, were not in network. And so that had big implications for us, not only from an administrative burden, if you call it that, just the time it takes, because we have to file those claims now ourselves. The doctors don't do that on our behalf. But then beyond that, it has a huge financial implication for us, because there are now two separate sets of deductibles and out-of-pocket maximums. So that's one way that it's affected me personally, and I know that that happens to a lot of people too. There's a lot of anxiety tied up in this notion that your ability to receive healthcare in a lot of cases is tied to your ability to maintain employment, your ability to work.
Yes, I agree with that, and I'm not a big fan of ACA. In fact, I advocate its repeal. Yet, I do believe it's got some positive features, and one of those positive features is clearly, portability, and that's in response to the kinds of problems that you experienced. I pretty much experienced the exact same thing as a contractor. I mean, for many years, I worked for one company, and I had what I thought was a pretty good plan. But in retrospect, I feel like I was sort of blinded to the real underlying cost because, of course, you say, gee, I'm only paying $300 or $400 a month for my family health care plan, but you don't realize that behind the scenes, there's thousands of dollars being paid by a big company that's buying this care for you and limiting your choices. So I do like the portability feature of it. I have been beaten up by having to change plans as a consultant and contractor, going from year to year, buying gap coverage, never quite knowing what sort of things are covered going in and out of network. So even as a person who thought the old system was better than the new system, I recognize, looking back, that there were some really serious problems. Now, one of the things that I talked to Chris Connell about recently was the fact that, and you'll have something to say about this, these employer-sponsored plans that came about, they started coming about in the late 30s, and they really started taking off during World War II. But they came about really, I guess the seed was really planted back in 1913 with the creation of the income tax, but also, the U.S. Treasury offered tax benefits to companies for the provision of fringe benefits. So we don't need to go into this whole history, but over time the AMA was sort of partnering with the insurance companies to create coverage and to create wider coverage and to ward off the evils of socialism and ward off the evils of union coverage and stuff like that. But that this employer thing became very entrenched in people's minds. So when I look back at Obama saying, if you want your plan, you can keep it. So at the time, I laughed about that. I knew that wasn't going to happen, and it didn't happen. But I realize now that the tactic was to say, look, there's a bunch of people out there who've got this coverage that they like. They don't see the full cost of it, right? So as long as they're in with these big risk pools through their company, they're going to do okay. They're going to be able to keep their coverage, and we're going to put this other plan into place. Right now it all looks like a bit of a fiasco, and so even the people now who are benefiting from or who are promoting Medicare for all are simply looking back at ACA and saying, well, what a disaster that was, right? That clearly didn't do what we wanted to do. So there's no question there. I should ask you a question, but our basic point here is that this employer-based healthcare system that we've had, starting right from the beginning, but really accelerating after World War II and kind of, I think, peaking in the 50s, it hasn't controlled costs, right? And that's one thing that I didn't think about when I was so happy to have my own plan for 17 or 18 years, really closer to 25 years, having a fairly cushy plan, not really realizing what the costs were, and thinking, I remember thinking at the time that it was always kind of sketchy about what my benefits were and how I could get get these extremely high cost services. I remember my son had some 50 grand surgery, and so I thought, well, that's great. I can't believe they're making money off of me anymore. But I thought that those were pretty good plans, and in retrospect, I realized how phony they were. So, do you have any thoughts on that, on the employer-based plans?
Well, so I'm opposed to employer-based plans. I mean, I think that's just my main point here. I think that's a tie that we need to break, not only because of how it will help us on the healthcare side, but also what that will do. I mean, it has all sorts of ripple effects too.
Yeah.
I mean, you empower workers in that sense because people wouldn't feel tied to a particular employer just because of the benefits that employer offers. I know a lot of people stick with jobs that are just awful.
Yeah.
Because they can't afford to lose that health insurance. If you're in a union and maybe you work with a union, I know that the gentleman from Texas, Beto O'Rourke, right? He's mentioned this. He said that he's opposed to this Medicare for all kind of sweeping mandate because there are a lot of unions out there who have fought for really good health plans. But the thing about it is, if we switch to a different thing, that union who's trying to advocate for those employees, they can now fight for something else instead of trying to just go after the health plan because it's already taken care of.
Right. Well, originally, again, this whole devil's deal between the American Medical Association and the insurance companies was precisely to undercut groups like unions and fellowship societies and these other groups, these social clubs that were actually buying healthcare on their own. And a lot of them were ethnic groups too. They were just sort of collectively buying some kind of, concierge style. In some cases, I read recently, there were actually some of these union areas had their own in-house doctor, right? So I don't see anything wrong with that. That way of doing things. But it's true that originally the ACA was sold as a means of making sure it didn't inhibit job mobility, right? So we do believe, and this is certainly one of the values that we share with regard to international trade, that we believe in job mobility. People should be out there looking for what it is that they can find, right? So to the extent that company-based medical care or even union-based medical care creates burdens on that, creates a problem for people to go out and seek the best price, that's a problem. Right. So we're in agreement on that.
I think so. I think it's fair to say that. Yeah. And I would also add that the ACA, as it was being rolled out, as it was being discussed, things like that, I look back at that now and I see that this is, to me personally, I see this as an example of where compromise can be a bad thing because we end up with this weird kind of hodgepodge system where people have done some horse trading here and there, and we end up with a system that has a lot of loopholes in it that is failing a lot of people just so that we could have gotten it across the finish line. And so when I hear people talk about if we were to implement improved and expanded Medicare for all, then that would mean repealing Obamacare. And that's the thing that everybody says. You don't want to repeal Obamacare. You don't want to repeal the ACA. But if we're going to replace it with something better, I would be okay with that.
Well, one correction, though. I believe that Obamacare was not bipartisan. I think it was overwhelmingly Democrats and Republicans overwhelmingly. And so it really wasn't a product of what we call, bipartisan horse trading.
That's
And just to make a point I made the other day on Kano's show, I heard an interview with Justin Amash, who's no longer a Republican, he's an independent, but one of the things he said about the way that Congress operates these days is that it doesn't come to consensus. The parties are locked in tribal warfare, and members can vote up and down on it, but there's no more deliberation left on the floor. So the whole idea that congressmen from different parties who have different leanings, whether they're green or libertarian leanings, could actually discuss this out in the open and offer amendments and come to a compromise is kind of dead, right? So I hope I didn't get too far off track, but let's jump to the topic of competition for doctors, because that's one of the points that I mentioned, and it's a point also that some progressive economists like Dean Baker advocate. They say, look, for many decades we've had competition from manufacturing, and a lot of the people in the working classes and lower classes have had to compete with foreign labor, and the professional class benefited from that. And guess what? They're still benefiting from the protection of the American Medical Association and the high barriers to entry that they've created through their internships and stuff like that, internship requirements. But my understanding, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but European doctors make about half of what American doctors make. So there is a very big cost differential. So the question becomes, well, how do you control the cost of high-priced doctors? Well, I would argue, it's fairly simple. You can import more professional doctors, or you can allow people to more easily travel for medical service to cheaper doctors, whether that's Mexico or Canada or Central America or wherever. But you can import more doctors.
So this is interesting. So
Yeah.
and this may get us a little too far in the weeds, but
Yeah.
I'm curious about
Yeah.
this against that background.
Yeah.
Would you propose something to say, like, how do you feel about telemedicine, for instance? So if somebody could go to the doctor, across a border, somebody could go to an English doctor, we'll say,
Right.
in America remotely.
Yeah. Well, no, I think that's a great idea. That opens up the market for competition. And we know that because of what we're doing here. We're on YouTube, and there are other hubs like WenHub, Scott Adams's product, where he lines up experts all over the world, and they can exchange. He's got some kind of crypto token, but they can also exchange money for services. Now, I know that telemedicine has got some restrictions on it because, again, probably because of the medical requirements. They actually have to see you first, right? They have to look and see that you're a real person. You're not an android. You're not a fake bot. That you're flesh and blood, and you've done all these tests, and they know you, and so they can go to their notes. And so when you're dealing with them, I was going to say telepathically, when you're dealing with them in this environment, screen to screen, they can understand your vitals, and if you need testing, and they can continue to offer the services that you need. So absolutely, that is a great way of opening up competition for doctors. So the problem that some people have, and I know medical care advocate Tara Long, who is somewhere in the building. I don't see her in the crowd, but she has been. Oh, there she's photobombing us. You're so rude. I can't believe how rude you are. Photobombing us in the middle of our show. So, she has said, well, wait a second, I don't want any mistakes to happen. Okay, well, that's true. None of us want any mistakes to happen. But then the question becomes, do we all get the finest care money can buy? All of us. And then the question becomes, well, how much would that cost? Do we really all get a Lexus under Medicare for all, under single payer, under any kind of healthcare system that you can imagine that provides care for everybody? So that was sort of a rhetorical question. I didn't mean to spring it on. You, but my point is that we're bringing in competition. We're bringing in new doctors, and the existing doctors are going to squeal like stuck pigs because someone's competing for their job, right? And this is the professional class saying, well, look, I spent 12 years in school, in postgraduate, I was in an internship. I incurred, $500,000 in student loans. I got to pay all this stuff back. So I have to make $400,000 a year just to pay this stuff back. To which I say, well, not everybody needs the best doctor in the world for the ailments that they've got. So Would you?
So this is interesting, and I love
Yeah,
how everything
yeah.
is just interconnected too.
Yeah.
Because really, what you're getting at here is pointing out that any reform or restructuring of our
Yeah.
healthcare or health insurance system
Yeah.
also has to include some sort of action with regard to, we'll call it malpractice, or
Right.
would it be that would fall under tort reform or something like that? Is that right?
Yeah. So a big part. So if there were a doctor here, the doctor would say, "Well, you don't know what my malpractice premiums are, right?" And so I do agree that there is, there are some deep weeds here that we're not going to get into because we're trying to keep this fairly clear for voters to see and voters to hear our positions. Just to recap, if you've stayed with us so far, we talked about both our platforms with regard to medical care, and we talked a little bit about competition. We talked a little bit about the what makes Medicare for all attractive to people, and what are the downsides of the ACA. So is there anything else we want to say about this idea of competition for doctors? Because we do know, if you know any doctors, and I know a few doctors, that they are very angry with the way that they are being treated and the way that they have to treat patients. So I don't know if you've been to a doctor recently, but you will get the 15-minute plan, right? That's all they're going to talk to you for. If you say, I've got a sore knee, and they say, okay, you're here to talk about your knee, we've got 15 minutes. And then you say, but I also have this little, you got to make another appointment, right? Because they are unbundling their services at the point of sale. They want to upsell you. They don't want to spend 45 minutes with you. And I know genuinely good doctors who know that they have to spend more than 15 minutes with you. They've got to spend 30 minutes, 45 minutes, or an hour to deal with the whole constellation of problems you might have. Right now, the insurance companies are driving this, and they're sort of forcing them as for-profit ventures to provide poor service. So just that's sort of the segue into our problem with this insurance, this corporate insurance control over what doctors are actually doing.
Right.
So you're in agreement.
If I'm understanding what you're saying, what I see is kind of a centralization of power problem. And in this case, it's the health insurance companies who have partnered with these doctors. And I know doctors too. So my dad's a PA.
Okay.
And so I've experienced this my whole life, this challenge of it's the cattle call. It's having to see 60 patients in a day because you get to see them for 15 minutes at a time. And that poses a lot of challenges. And I would say that it lowers the quality of care that people can receive.
That's right.
Simply because of they have to do it.
That's right. And it also, disturbingly, I think, lowers our expectations for what it is that we can accomplish with a doctor.
Yep.
So my confidence in doctors right now is really at an all-time low. I know our mutual friend Lily just posted on social media the other day that she hasn't been insured since 2010, and is goes into the emergency room whenever she has any kind of serious issue. That's bad. When you can't get a primary care physician who's going to be attentive to your needs. You can't prepay them. You can't use them as a concierge. You can't make them your primary because they're for a number of reasons. So we got a big dilemma. So as we get into our final minutes here, I think one of the things we wanted to make sure we got to was at least this idea that if there is some kind of healthcare system provided by the federal government, and that there should be, let's call it an opt-out. There has to be some kind of side-by-side way in which people can have their medical privacy. They can do their telemedicine. They can provide their own self-medication in the form of cannabis, because different states are on different schedules, right? With regard to medical cannabis, with regard to the use of psychotropic drugs for their mental health needs, the use of opiates for managing their pain. So we know that every state is kind of different. So to me, the idea of this at the federal level is not a good idea. Yet I do support it at the state level. I do believe that states can secure coverage for large groups of people, and so I would be more partial to a state model. Now I've kind of babbled and lost track of what I was saying, but let's try to get back to where we thought we were going to end. So,
but just to kind of add on to that, I agree, and that's part of where I stand as well. Is that I would see Medicare for All being federally funded through taxation, but administered at the state and local level, and then that way we can at least combat that problem with centralization, which, regardless of whether it's a corporation or whether it is within government, I think you have that problem when the power is too centralized. So if we can administer it at the state and local level, I think that would have lots of benefits, because it would let states manage that money the way that their state needs it, and it wouldn't have to be you group in the middle.
So I think you would agree with this point that, and this is based on our previous discussions about the military-industrial complex and the cronyism and the fact that it can't manage costs and things like that, that something like that at the federal level would face the same types of problems, right? It would face cronyism. It would face, creeps trying to take advantage of the system. It would be, friends of Trump or friends of Obama or friends of Clinton, whoever it is, friends of Bush. I remember I'm always very bipartisan in my dislike of the other two parties. So I don't want you to think I dislike Republicans more than Democrats, because I really dislike them both quite a bit. So having said that, don't you see this? How would you manage the problem? How would the Green Party face that sort of cronyism problem at the federal level? Go ahead.
Yeah, and it gets into a separate topic, but part of that has to do with electoral reform, I think, is part of it, and the other part of it is dealing with broadly dealing with corruption in government, and you can do that through legislation that's targeted at lobbyists and legislation that tries to get rid of that revolving door in politics, where you have politicians and lobbyists basically doing the same thing, favoring policies that favor companies and things like that. I think that's one way you'd have to come at it, because ultimately any plan that goes into the federal government is going to face the same type of issue. And we would have that at the state level too, don't get me wrong. But you have to combat the corruption, you have to, and the corrupting influence of money and power if you're going to have anything like this in place and have it effective. So
again, just to get back to this idea that for people who would be marginalized by the system, and let's say it didn't control costs, there would have to be a safety valve of some kind. You would have to be able to go out and self-medicate. Well, maybe the laws in your state are too restrictive. You may have to go out and find a specialist in a certain area if you had mental health issues, or if you had very unique problems. We know, for example, that veterans have some very unique problems, so they need to seek out a specialist for physical therapy and things like that. I mean, there would no one. I was just going to make a big general statement. Now let me step back from it. I can see state systems working along the lines of, we want to make sure everybody's covered, so everybody has access to some kind of catastrophic coverage that they can buy up to a certain amount, and that they have certain things available to them through the medical system, whether those turn out to be vouchers or tax credits or something. But that we need to have very serious cost control methods in place to make sure it doesn't blow up because, as you know, California attempted to do this, and they really can't do it because it would cost something on the order of $400 billion, and even a blue state such as California, which would be a natural experiment, which would be a natural location for an experiment like this, can't even afford it, right? So to the extent that I support the idea of doing it at the state level, because the state is a laboratory of democracy, and we are kinder to our people who live in our state than we are to people who live in Texas or California or Rhode Island or wherever it is. It makes more sense to have a state legislature put something like this in place. So anyway, we're going to try to wrap it up. We've gone a little past the time that we wanted to go. We didn't get to talk about the whole issue of patents, but let me leave most of the last word to you. If you've got something that we haven't covered that you'd like to talk about in the last minute or so here.
No, I mean, I think that we covered everything pretty well. I think I'd love to chat more about
excuse me,
the whole patent process, because that's interesting. I hadn't thought about it from that angle. So that might be a good topic for another episode too, in terms of IP law and things like that.
That's right. That's a very interesting topic. Again, there aren't necessarily a lot of Republicans and Democrats who buy into this because, of course, they get large contributions from people who benefit from these big monopoly, what they call in economics monopoly rents, which is just to say they get high profits that are protected, so their cash flows are just protected. So no wonder no one would want to give that up. So it's really only libertarians and progressives and Greens that are saying, well, why don't we think about a better way of developing drugs?
Yeah.
Because this was originally put in at the time of the Constitution based on let's call it the infant industry argument. That's another wonky phrase that I swore I would never use. But a lot of traditional, economists said, in order to get growth, we have a collective action problem. We need to make sure that we build infrastructure, railways, waterways, and we need to protect ideas. We need, through copyright, we need to protect inventions through patent. And it turns out that it's really, really difficult to patent ideas. And we have seen the implications of that with insulin. So insulin is something that's been around for, I don't know, 60, 80 years. 10% of the population suffers from diabetes. Another 10, 20% probably pre-diabetes. Why are people rationing insulin? Why? And it's because they sort of ladder the patents on this. They've got, the way that this works is they structure, they develop a new patent, and then they pay doctors and pharmacists not to recommend the older drug, to only recommend the newer drug. So when you read about the Trump administration and gag orders on doctors and lifting gag orders, pharmacists and doctors have to be able to tell you that last year's model is good enough, right? You don't need this year's model. This year's model, when I'm using the comparison with cars, right? I got a 2017 car. Do I need a 2019? No. In 2022, will I need a 2022 car? No, I might just need my 2017 car. So you can go with drugs that have passed out of their protection period.
Yeah.
And that's why people are so angry right now, because they can't access that and their doctors aren't telling about it. So yeah, this is a very interesting issue.
Yeah, for real.
So we are wrapping up. We've gone about 5 minutes past our limit, right?
Just about.
Yeah. 10 minutes past our limit.
Oh, we're in good shape.
I blame it all on Alan.
Yeah, Alan, that's all.
Oh, now the crowd is reacting against you. I can't believe it. Anyway, this is Jeff and Alan at the Jeff and Alan Show at Julia's Coffee, or as Alan likes to call it,
the Alan and Jeff Show, because that is what it's called.
Disgraceful. Anyway, we're done for today. We look forward to your questions. We will consider them carefully. We know this is a very, very hot issue. People get very passionate about this, and we're trying to deal with it with the sensitivity that it deserves, because we've been roiled by it just like everybody else, and we don't exist in a bubble of privilege. So we're welcome to take any of the tough questions you throw at us.
That's right. And just one thing to add here at the end, I don't know if we mentioned it already, for anybody who hasn't heard this, if you're new watching, Jeff and I are both running for Congress. You should visit our websites.
JeffScottForCongress.com.
And AlanForCongress.com as well.
Thank you.